confession, only we have nothing to be called guilty about. We are not the hypocrites, and the truth is on our side. 2 weeks after our second forum, a horrific war broke out in the Ukraine, and as it unfolds and intensifies, we pray for peace. What the war has done from a British and indeed European energy perspective is highlight the foolish single dimension of climate change policy. Net zero does not exist in a vacuum. People are now seeing that energy security and independence are equally, if not more important, as is of course the cost. Yesterday, I heard a commentator talk about household bills rising to £4,000 later this year. 2 weeks ago, we launched a government petition to stop the ban on fracking, and in 10 days, we achieved over 10,000 signatures, forcing the government to respond to us. Officially, we're still waiting for it. We're now up to 15,000 signatures and rising. Let's keep that going. Just in the last few days, we have seen a new organisation launched by the irrepressible Nigel Farage calling for a referendum on net zero, a campaign we started last October with our YouGov poll, which showed that 58% of those with a view did want a referendum on these misguided policies. Well done, Nigel, for jumping on board our bus. We also wrote an open letter to the CEO of the Oil and Gas Authority, asking them to halt the concreting up of the only 2 last remaining shale gas wells in the UK, which was set to happen next Tuesday and would have put the kibosh completely on fracking. We have also been lobbying Number 10 and other climate insiders too. So we were delighted to hear that late last night, the government agreed to place a stay of execution on the concrete trucks whilst further investigations are made into the viability of fracking. And this very afternoon, we're even more delighted to hear the Prime Minister in PMQs announced that he is opening the door to fracking in the UK. Thank you, Boris, for listening to CAR26. And don't stop listening, as fracking is just the start and there is much more where that came from. On tonight's panel, we have Darren Grimes. Darren was the man who, having campaigned for Brexit, took on the Electoral Commission single-handedly when they accused him of foul play and won. Good for him. He presents a YouTube channel called Reasoned, which we highly recommend to CAR26 followers, and recently became a presenter on GB News. Professor Brian Katz, the renowned physicist and chartered engineer. Brian started his career in government research at Harwell, moving to academic research at Imperial College, gaining a physics degree and becoming both a chartered engineer and a physicist during his 18 years. He has spent 14 years researching and writing on the scientific realities of nation-state energy futures, applying the control of physics and natural reality to both energy generation and climate change, to contrast them with the beliefs that drive government policy. He has written 2 papers on these subjects and presents the scientific reality to public audiences. That's when he's not being no platform by activists, that is. Sophie Koren. Sophie is in her first year at Durham University, but is already making a name for herself in the big wide world of journalism and broadcasting. Like Darren, not afraid to swim against the tide of opinion, we need more people like Sophie to challenge some bad ideas that academics think students should be force-fed. Hopefully her actions will help empower many other students to jump on our bandwagon. And Lance Foreman, also swimming against the tide, like his salmon, the smoked salmon king returns to our forum once again to provide a voice of common sense and business sense, a quality which seems to be severely lacking in government circles these days. Last, but by no means least, we have Calvin Robinson, a political commentator, policy advisor and campaigner and senior fellow at the Policy Exchange. Calvin has a background in tech and video games, so if anybody here knows the difference between real science and science fiction, Calvin is the man. So without further ado, let's get this bus swimming against the tide. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. I'm going to start with Darren, actually. I'm going to come to you first. I want to know what you think about the immiseration of the working classes through energy policy failure. Go for it.
Well, look, I guess it pains me to do this, right? But I feel like I have to preface anything I'm about to say today by saying that I'm a conservative, right? I believe in protecting what makes this country great, whether that be green rolling vistas, you know, everything you imagine when you think of England in your head. And whenever I'm on holiday and come back to England, that's been quite some time, to be honest, since I was last on a flight. But coming back and seeing the landscape of this country still takes my breath away. It is remarkably beautiful and well worth protecting. And those, you know, the wildlife and all the rest of it. There are many conservative instincts, I think, involved innately in the British people in wanting to protect those things. So I feel like I have to say I am by no stretch of the imagination someone who wants to say, well, to damn with it all, let's just go hell for leather and forget the environment. I'm absolutely not of that view. And it's a sad reality.
Think any of us are.
No, nor do I. And I think it's a sad reality and a pretty damning indictment for speech and debate in this country that, you know, as soon as you level a charge against net zero as a policy, as you say, a misguided policy, I think a fundamentally really important misguided policy that dictates a hell of a lot of things, not just the economy, but the way in which people live their lives. You're dismissed as being a climate denier, or a whole list of accusations are leveled at you. You're a shill for big whatever these days. And I would deem that to be a profoundly anti-human accusation when it comes to energy and climate, because there's a reason, Lois, right? There's a reason why, and I'll try and use my words carefully here, but there's a reason why, you know, people from the northeast of England, looking back through my family tree, back in the days when you wouldn't really stand a chance of getting past child age, right? Because of the fact that we didn't have good living standards, we didn't have good access to progress and all the rest of it. Fossil fuels have been an amazing tool for ensuring that we do
life expectancy, haven't
exactly all of these things, the fruits of modern progress you can lay at fossil fuels' door. So I think they've been fantastic in that respect. But with that foundation established, right, what got me active in this debate is, and I actually saw me transition from being, I think, this quite naively idealistic green, if you want to coin a phrase, obsessed, I guess, with the idea that wind and solar are going to be the land of milk and honey, because I was brought up on a diet of, and I don't know if you guys remember, but there was this apocalyptic movie called The Day After Tomorrow. And it was at a similar time, of course, when Al Gore he had ran for the American presidency the same year, I think, as this film came out. And this was pushed in my school. This was pushed, you know, we were on a diet of this stuff, being told that the climate's going to hell in a handcart, and that we'd be if we didn't, I mean, the Queen dies in that film, for God's sake, right? Treasonous, not to mention apocalyptic. And I tell you what, God smiled on the American people when it didn't make Al Gore president of the United States and instead made George W. Bush president. But I've been on quite a journey, I think it's safe to say. And it's not hard to, I think, come to those green conclusions when you're spoon-fed a diet of this stuff. You're told that what you're watching on the television isn't Hollywood fantasy, right? These are things that the scientists are telling is going to happen. And now, of course, it's Greta Thunberg that proselytized, that teenage truant, she's proselytizing doom and gloom instead of Al Gore. You might say a more retailable package than Al Gore. But I've changed my mind. Well, maybe. I've changed my mind on all of this. And I think that, you know, that obviously that's a journey from adolescence to now. But when I was still at school, you know, I was, and I mean this, Lois, as well, I was switching my mother's energy bills to try and create a little bit of wriggle room in a single parent household, right? So I've been alive to the fact that energy is a massive amount it costs a huge proportion. Of course it does. And it has for some time, right? I mean, I'm talking about the days I left school just around the time of the financial crash. This is a whole nother ball game, what we're experiencing right now.
It's
right?
Massive. It's bigger than Brexit even. It's an international
I don't think
thing
people
now.
have clocked onto that, right? The reality of Britain's energy policy comes into, you're starting to see the focus a little bit more next month when the energy price cap goes up, when that ceiling is raised to what the energy bills can actually be. But that isn't the half of it, right? April's rise with the price cap delaying that, the brute force of the cost of energy today, that isn't pricing in the cost of war, right, with Ukraine.
No.
That isn't pricing in all of these other things. And of course, the closure of coal-powered plants and all the rest of these really, really, I think, stupid decisions that have been made.
Well, it's idealism, isn't it?
It is, of course it is. It's Panglossian in the extreme to think that I'd be all for it, right? If, as they describe, like a sort of knight on a valiant white steed coming galloping down the hill to save us all in the form of this new technology that's going to create the energy of plenty in a land of milk and honey. I'd be all for it if that was happening, but the technology isn't there, right?
No, and it's all based on flawed science as well, Darren. I mean, a lot of people would argue that, and then they say, oh, 97% of scientists agree. Well, I've had it said to me that if 97% of scientists agree on something, it's not science. But I'd just like to take the opportunity to bring in Professor Brian Katz, the physicist. Hello, Brian. Tell us how you became interested in the climate science and why it's all nonsense, why renewables are rubbish, and why CO2 has got nothing to do with the atmosphere, the climate changing. If that's not too big a task.
That's not at all presumptive of you, Lois, is it? My interest was, first of all, I have to say, I'm not a professor. I'm much better than that.
Wow, okay.
I left academia after 14 years in research and development in a number of subjects because A, it didn't pay very much, and B, it was very clear that most of what I was doing was fairly pointless in terms of the research and what these people were actually doing. They weren't producing science that was actually benefiting anybody, but I was being paid for doing it, and I could earn more out. So I went and did an MBA at Manchester, because there were only 2 colleges you could do it at then. Went off into the world of technology. We did brain scanners and medical imaging and communications and printers and all sorts of useful things I got involved in, which was great. And if it didn't work, you couldn't sell it. And that's a principle which goes through everything I do, because if you're basically an engineer, which is applied physics, you look at things to find out whether this is real or not. Is it supported by the laws of physics? Does it work? Do the observations show?
So what you're saying is that renewables are not supported by the laws of physics?
I haven't got there yet, but yes.
Oh, sorry, okay.
What you find what I thought was, and if you talk to anybody in my kind of background about the journey that they've taken to become skeptical about what's actually being done, they've all done the same thing. You go away, you look at the physics, you know what the laws of physics are, you know what energy density is about, you know what intermittency is about, and if you're an engineer, you probably worked on the money side of it, so you can cost it as well. And the thing you find out awfully quickly is that wind power is a very poor source of energy. It's okay for a feudal economy where you have horses and people drag things along themselves, but it's absolutely—
That's what they want, isn't it?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, we had to have steam to have an industrial revolution, and still do. Steam drives power stations, except we produce electricity from it. And basically, intermittency absolutely ruins everything, because first of all, you can't generate enough energy from the inherently weak energy source that the wind is, and waves, by the way. And secondly, if it's intermittent, you would have to store it. Having covered the whole country in the sea with windmills, you'd have to then store the energy in batteries. Now, if you put the energy into batteries, or indeed into pumped storage, which you keep hearing being thrown away by the Greens, oh, we'll do some of this and spend another £1 trillion on that. And that's kind of what you're talking about, because if you want to save a week's energy for the grid at the moment, that's 7 terawatt hours, and 7 terawatt hours will cost you 350 billion per annum to replace in batteries. Now, that's
really
an awful lot of power stations at 5 billion a pop per gigawatt.
Yeah.
The whole thing makes absolutely no sense at all. It's just a way of giving money to people who collect subsidies and charge the people who are paying for the electricity for the privilege of having these things built, when they could just build the nuclear power stations and get on with it. 24/7 sustainable, zero CO2. But of course, that's not got any investment, because it doesn't pass a lot of quick money on 100% subsidies or 200% subsidies to the people who are generating this renewable electricity. So it's a wholly unsustainable thing, but it's making a lot of money for people.
Yeah, and it's all based on the premise, obviously, that CO2 is driving climate change. But can you tell our viewers a little bit about why you think that's absolute nonsense as well, please, Brian?
Well, I came to that second, having realised that the basic principles, the electrical energy principles and the economics of renewables was a bit of nonsense. I thought, I'll have a look at the CO2 thing now. The first thing I found was that the change that we see currently isn't at all unusual. It's happened every 1,000 years for several thousand years. There's a cyclic change in the climate, and it's about 2 degrees in range. It's about 0.7 or 0.8 degrees per century. When it's changing, it's not really a sine wave. It tends to go down and then bump along and then go back up again.
So absolutely nothing to do with us then?
That was nothing, because it happened in the medieval warm period and the Roman warm period and the Minoan warm period. And what's happening now is very little different from what that record shows. And the
so
other
it's just a money-making thing then? Just a money-making thing then? All about subsidies and people making vast amounts of money?
Well, the motivations are probably something for another discussion, but
okay.
This was decided in the United Nations at a time when they were looking for something to get people scared about, and they'd failed with limits to growth, the Club of Rome thing. That all the resource, we're going to run out of resources, which in fact hasn't happened because we found a lot more and produced them more cheaply since then. Then it was going to be the population explosion, which of course happened but stops because once people's children stop dying, they stop having them. So your birth rate has dropped dramatically across the world, except in a few countries in Africa, basically, and Afghanistan. So it's down to say 2 in Bangladesh.
So they found a way to frighten us all then, Brian?
Exactly. So it's the old story of let's find something to frighten. Oh, but the other thing is, it allows, if you pick on CO2 as the problem, it allows you to control the economies of the countries that you wish to control. So you can control the West, but by forcing the West to adopt expensive rationed energy, while allowing Asia or China as much energy, cheap, plentiful energy as it wants, which is how you make an economy grow. And
so it's a deliberate sabotage.
So basically what they're doing is that to the world. And that's what the UN wanted to do.
Right, on that point, I'm just going to come and bring Sophie in here. How are you? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good.
Thank you for joining us tonight. I know you hate green taxes, and of course, you know, the green taxes and the cost of energy and all of that affects everybody, but especially young people who might be thinking about, you know, God forbid, one day actually moving out of home. But I wanted to speak to you specifically about the whole woke thing, the whole woke green agenda at universities. I mean, do young people actually really believe this stuff? Do they think that it's Armageddon and the world's going to end? Or do they actually, you know, when you could sit down and have a drink, they think, oh, you know, we don't actually believe it, but we don't want to be accused of being a climate denier. So that I just wanted to talk to you about those things, really.
Well, I suppose there's two ways of sort of answering that question. The answer is yes, but there's two reasons for it. The first reason is that it's very common to be taught in schools. So I obviously went to school, I left secondary school in 2014, 2000? Yeah, something like that. No, that's when I started. Lord, imagine leaving. No, that's when I started secondary school, sorry. And so we were always taught about, climate change, how the world's going to end, how, the planet's burning. And I think the biggest change for young people especially is the rise of our lovely hero, Greta Thunberg. So this idolization of Greta has, made young people especially, sort of become these hardcore, ardent climate warriors because they've seen this young teenage girl turn into a superstar by scaring everybody out of their wits' end. So they sort of idolize that. And, if you question the heroism of our Saint Greta, then you're in trouble, basically, for our age, because everyone will call you a climate.
So they do believe it then? They've grown up on a diet of it and they do believe it. Do they question it once they get to uni? Because university students used to rebel. I don't know if that's the case.
No.
Anymore. You do? You're a hero.
But
most
I
of them
rebel,
seem to
but no, most of the time,
I
not.
do
I mean,
too,
we have
yeah.
loads of climate protests at Durham all of the time, standing outside of the Billy B or Bill Bryson Library with their climate, banners or whatever. We do a lot of climate activism at Durham. Young people are, are the drivers of this thing. And the reason why is because a lot of these policies are coming out and the government are saying, we're doing it to give back to young people. They're carrying out this utter madness in our name, effectively. And a lot of young people have gotten so caught up in their idolization of Greta Thunberg that they've realized that these policies actually have massive consequences for them. But,
I didn't realize that.
The style lifestyle that Greta's living.
Yeah, the jet set lifestyle. Oh, no, she goes everywhere on yachts, doesn't she? She doesn't fly, so she just goes by boat or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's all complete nonsense.
I think she walks on the water.
She does walk on the water. So is the answer to my question then? Yes, they do believe it wholeheartedly, hook, line and sinker.
I don't actually know, because part of me doesn't understand how they could believe such rubbish, because I blatantly don't. And I don't know whether they actually believe it. I don't know whether they've actually sat there and thought about it, or if they're just sort of jumping on this Instagram trend bandwagon. And they say that they believe it, but deep down, do they actually? Because do they actually know anything about it? Do they actually have an opinion? Because most of them,
when you talk to them about
an opinion.
They're just force-fed. But they're not even force-fed. They love it, don't they? Just want the information and want to be controlled. When you talk to them, do they change their minds?
No, I tend to get called like a climate change denier or something along those lines. And how I should listen to Greta Thunberg, or, they love to tell us to listen to the scientists, didn't they, this crowd, but then they try and shove this like teenage girl down my throat, like as if she's some sort of scientist, but there we go. She's
not a scientist. And what about green taxes then? Because you said to me you wanted to talk about that. You said you hate them.
Oh, tell
us more about that.
They make me absolutely rage, because there's just no point. When we have a cost of living crisis, you're taxing people into poverty for some ludicrous green fantasy that is just not going to achieve anything. And at that point, all you're doing is destroying your own economy by doing that, because if you tax people into poverty, those same people have no disposable income to pay for things. And the taxes are completely and utterly unnecessary. They're not going to stop people doing things that harm the environment, because those things that harm the environment are things that are necessary for us to live. So it's not going to stop people doing things. All it's doing is putting people into further and further and further poverty. And it's a choice. They're making a choice.
Yeah. Do you think it should be optional then? Because that's one of the things that we're campaigning for at CAR26, for it to be an optional levy on your energy bill.
I just don't think there should be a levy at all.
But if people want to pay it, they won't. But okay. Right, we've heard a lot about the whole domestic side of things, but let's talk to Lance Foreman. Tell us about the business aspect to all this, Lance. How does it affect you with your business, your smoked salmon business?
Well, Lois, I have to say, I'm actually sort of feeling reasonably positive about what's happened over the last 6 months, which may seem odd, given that we are having a cost of living crisis, and energy independence has actually been the cause, you could say, of the war in Ukraine. If Europe wasn't dependent on Russia, Putin could never have done what he did. But it first sort of came to my attention last October in my own business, where my electricity bill in our smoked salmon factory jumped from £200,000 a year to £400,000 a year. I mean, that is absolutely crazy. It's a hell of a lot of extra fish to sell. It means I can't employ more people, and it means we had to put our prices up. And we will be typical of every business out there. Every business is going to have to put its prices up. You're going to have an inflationary spiral. Wages will go up. Don't be surprised if inflation later this year is at 10, 15%, and actually potentially stagflation, because we will have inflation with a potential recession as well. So very, very dangerous times economically. But why do I feel positive? I mean, with all that, you might think, oh my God, this is terrible. Why do I feel positive? I feel positive because I was always I would say a climate skeptic, not a denier. I didn't really know that much about it. But when I was faced with these costs, I started getting involved and started doing more research. And the more I found and the more I researched, the more I realized how nonsensical so much of this stuff is. And I think the blessing in disguise of these high prices and the cost of living crisis is that people are going to question it. net zero is a luxury of prosperity. When you don't feel you're paying for it and it's just happening, you think you're doing good for the planet. But once it starts hitting your pockets in a big time, you start investigating it. And I'm absolutely convinced the more people research this stuff, they'll realize that it doesn't make any sense. The war as well, I mean, of course, it is an absolute tragedy, but it has drawn people's attention to the importance of energy security. So again, that is a sort of, in a bizarre sort of way, it is another sort of little blessing, obviously, the tragedy being the tragedy, but, it is drawing people's attention to it. So CAR26, I think you've done an absolutely magnificent job on
I was going to ask you about that, because it's your third forum now, isn't it? How do you think we're getting on?
I think you're doing absolutely brilliantly. I think the fact that you've been talking about fracking for the last 3 or 4 months, and now Boris has today announced that they're going to open up those or keep those wells open and actually start looking at fracking, I think is absolutely
just the
brilliant.
beginning.
And it is the beginning, but I'm not saying fracking is the answer to everything. At this moment in time, we're in such a dire situation. We should be doing everything. We should be fracking. We should be investigating the North Sea. We should be pressing ahead with those small nuclear sites. And we shouldn't stop now. But and I would say another lesson for you, Lois, is a lesson we learnt after Brexit, because I was quite involved in the Vote Leave campaign, as indeed was Darren. And
you were very involved.
Well, I was very involved. And on the 23rd of June 2016, that triumphant vote came through, and the Brexiters thought they had won the battle. Don't think you won this battle by Boris announcing that he's going to open up and allow fracking now. Because
let me have a small win, surely.
Well, it's a small win for a day, but you can't just assume that that's done and dusted. You now fight, because what happened? Boris was really pro-fracking in 2013. The government loved the idea of fracking, and then suddenly you had all these environmental groups coming along, campaigning, saying, there's going to be earthquakes, our babies will be deformed, it's a complete disaster, and so on and so forth. They scared everyone silly. A lot of them were Russian funded. Not all, but the Express has sort of done some, put out some information.
And even The Guardian did articles about it as well.
Exactly. So there were a lot of scare tactics. The fact of the matter is they all sort of went quiet on it for a bit because they thought they'd won that battle. And now we've won this battle today. They're going to come back in force, and they will do everything they can to stop fracking. And we have to keep, today I just heard some news that a new group has just been established today. I think they're called Tyre Extinction. They're going to be going around London.
I saw that.
They're going to be going around London, and if you drive an SUV, they're going to be slashing your tyres.
Oh my God.
It's awful.
It is, well, it really is criminal. But maybe they think, that you can do criminal activity after the statues are toppled. So you had your petition. It's reached 15,000. We need to get every one of those 15,000 people to get 6 other people to sign it, to get to 100,000, because the government needs to know that your average man in the street is behind this. They need to feel the support of the public, because this is good for Britain. It's good for for the government, and we mustn't be scared by these environmental nutters that are going to literally scare everybody silly and put a halt on it again.
No, well, I completely agree with you. And I wonder if the Mayor of London will be condemning those individuals that have done that. I bet he doesn't. Anyway, I'd like to come to, thank you very much. I'd like to come to Calvin now. How are you? Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Lois. Thank you for having me.
I've wanted to meet you for some time.
Well, I've been sat here having a cup of tea, and I've seen that Lance has got champagne or Prosecco going on. So
I know, he's a classy guy, is Lance. Probably whiskey, yeah. I just wanted to say...
for the bottle of wine.
I can't, it's Lent. And no social media for Calvin either, which has been a bit of a nightmare in terms of advertising.
I know, sorry.
Anyway, never mind. I just wanted to ask you, do you think this whole climate agenda is driven by business, for business, or by governments for control, like a sort of COVID type control agenda for the government? What do you think?
Yes.
Yes.
I think
Okay.
I pretty much agree with everything that Darren said, apart from I don't believe in the divine right of US presidents. But if, we've talked about this idea of climate change being man-made or not man-made. But if it was a man-made problem, the UK has been leading the way for decades anyway. It's clear that China is producing more CO2 emissions than the rest of Europe and America combined. So the changes that we make here at home would have very little impact if it was a man-made problem anyway, environmentally. But the changes have a massive impact on the wallets of normal everyday folk, and that's the issue, and that's the thing that I think most of us here are campaigning against. But as Professor Katz determined, it's not necessarily a man-made issue. I think, as you alluded to, Lois, I think I wouldn't say it's a money-making scam, but I think it's about money and power for the elites. And for the people that, Sophie sees in her university, it's about virtue signaling. It's about showing the world you are a good person. It's an easy way to identify yourself as a good person by campaigning for a good cause of the climate change problem. But what I've noticed is, so I was also involved in Vote Leave, but not as instrumental as Lance or Darren. I was a constituency team leader at the ground level. And what I've noticed is, I think we're all pretty much leavers here. I don't know if Sophie was born when the referendum was happening, but but what I'm saying is, I think there's something in it. Brexiteers tend to be more skeptical, more critical thinkers, perhaps. Maybe there's some evidence to look into there. But what I think the biggest issue for me is that we need to be self-sufficient as a nation. So we need to reduce our reliance on foreign interests. And I completely agree with Lance that we should be fracking. I think the reason we're not is because of all of the Russian propaganda, quite frankly, that we've had over here for years. And we've seen the same and worse in the European Union. Germany is practically compromised at this point. Therefore, NATO is compromised because they're entirely reliant on Russia. And we've seen Russia as a threat for a long time. So I'm not sure why we've encouraged and enabled that to happen.
It's very strange, isn't it?
It is very strange, but we need to rebuild and restore our own systems, and not just energy. Frankly, we need to rebuild our military might too, so that we're not reliant on the EU for anything really, because that's a limp institution that we know is going to continue to fail. But we need to take our energy production in-house, and I don't mean nationalize it. I mean deregulate, and I mean encourage and incentivize, support companies that want to produce energy in the UK, whether that's shale or nuclear. And that is a better option, I think, than this so-called rebate, which I think is ridiculous. A £200 energy loan, essentially, that everyone's going to be indebted to, whether they want it or not. There's no chance.
It won't even touch the sides either, will it? For a lot of
it won't, but it is the principle of the matter for me. Forcing a debt on a nation is the most unconservative thing I can think of. And the fact that we're all going to have that £200 debt, and I think it's from next year when we start to pay it back, regardless of whether you received it or not, we'll all be paying £40 a year extra. So in fact, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the government's going to make money from this scheme rather than supporting hardworking individuals that need the help. So it's not a loan, it's more like a loan shark situation, and it's awful. I think it's immoral, unconservative, and not the right approach at all.
No, it is immoral. And it's interesting that you talk about morals, because that was the second part of what I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, we share religious things, don't we, on Twitter all the time. And I know that you're the religious correspondent for GB News, which is wonderful, fantastic. Is this a cult, Calvin? What is this, a quasi-religious cult? Is it because most people have lost God and we need something to believe in? I mean, I talked to Sophie just briefly there, didn't I, about the sort of deification of Greta. Although I'm not sure as she gets older whether that's going to be quite as easy for her to pull off anymore, especially if she keeps eating. But
there's definitely something in that, Lois. I think when you look at what's happened in the nation over the last couple of years, well, especially over COVID, people are lost, people are searching. They don't necessarily know what they're searching for. I think that the Church of England let the country down in that it had an opportunity to step forward and be there for people's spiritual well-being. It wasn't. So people
it shut down before it needed to, didn't it?
Of course it did. So people have to fill that void elsewhere. And I think Extinction Rebellion is one of them. Black Lives Matter is another. There are all these hard left causes that offer a community, a place to feel a sense of belonging. They offer a moral code in that if you're not one of them, you are the bad guy, you're evil, and to be denounced. and cancel culture is a part of that, their moral compass. But it's not about good and bad. It's essentially about right and wrong. And it's quite unfortunate that the spiritual void of this country is being filled with hard left ideologies.
And unfortunately, how it seems to have infiltrated the Church of England as well. I mean, I don't want to say too many bad things about the Church of England because I'm a member of it, but the Archbishop of Canterbury seems to be extremely woke, doesn't he? Which is a shame. And Green fanatic as well. What do you think about that?
For legal reasons, I will not comment on the bishops or the archbishops of the Church of England at this time.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, well, I'm very torn with all that because I don't want to be critical, but yeah, okay. So it is a cult. It has filled a void. Darren, what do you think about it? Do you think it's a cult?
Well, on that point of on religion, just to go back ever so slightly, I will answer that question because I have no such legal restriction. I actually, if you look at what happened, we've referenced Brexit a fair bit, but if you look at Brexit, the biggest Brexit supporting group in the country were Anglicans. It was 60% voted leave.
Really?
Yeah,
Right.
It's a true statistic. Very, very sound lot, the Church of England, or those who are in the pews, right? But it's those who are sat in the House of Lords. It's those who are, the upper echelons of the church's elites, which are so out of step. They were so opposed to Brexit and actually said quite a fair few things which were deeply offensive to many of us who just because of the fact that we believe in national sovereignty, in self-reliance, in all of these things that we're addressing today, right now. There are similar themes throughout everything that we're saying. Because of all that, we were dismissed as not being, I think, at least this is how I took it, that we aren't worthy members of the flock. But when you're calling 60% of the people, who are turning out, and let's not forget, there are fewer bums on seats in the Church of England than at any point in many years. So
not when I'm singing, Darren.
Well, that's good. I can imagine that's true. I'll have to hear it one day. But Lois, I've forgotten the question that you actually asked me before I went off there. Is it a cult?
Is it a cult? Yeah.
I think actually that it's luxury goods virtue signaling. I think that's what it is in a lot of ways. For example, the way in which that there is a whole load of marketing done on energy supplier. I get energy supplier letters coming through saying I'm using 100% renewable energy. And I'm like, really? Well, hang on a minute. Really you all told me that this was cheaper. So why are my energy bills going up? Right? Yeah. You're sort of like, well, hang on a minute. And I actually don't care if you're using 100% renewable energy. I just care that you're heating my home, right? And you're keeping the lights on. That's what most families care about. So it's virtue signaling, and there's clearly marketing behind all of this, and it clearly works, and there's clearly something to it. But it's not surprising. It's not surprising. If you fear that if you don't support Black Lives Matter, you're going to be accused of racism. If you don't support Extinction Rebellion, you're going to be accused of being a climate denier. If you don't support all of these organizations and outfits which have, as Calvin rightly identified, incredibly hard left-wing views, then you will be called out. You are not one of the flock. Yeah. And I think
most people don't want to be ostracized.
Exactly. So we're picking up on so many themes, whether it be the Church of England, on Brexit, whether it be on climate change. There are so many themes in which you will be ostracized. I mean, to put it into, I was thinking about this earlier, actually, before I came online. And I've actually been kicked off, Lois. You'll be absolutely heartbroken to learn this. I've been kicked off of 2 dating apps. And I'm not some freak, right? That's messaging people or sending some, isn't it? And it's because I'm a conservative. Isn't there so a special one? Well, for conservatives, I don't think there is actually, but you're onto something. You'll have to get onto that. There's a money-making opportunity there. But there are so many ways in which I think you are risking being ostracized for just voicing an opinion, right? Yeah. And I think that is no clearer than on this issue, where if you do say, I fancy shale gas as another form of energy because competition and markets are a good thing. And Lois, as you well know, if there is no money to be made in fracking, then it won't work, right? It won't work. So let it happen. What are you so scared of? Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brian, tell us why we should be fracking.
I should be doing every possible way of getting gas and oil out of the ground, if it makes fiscal sense, as Darren just said. You know, if you, I would actually say, I've written a little list of very short statements here from what came up today. Can I just run
Okay, very extraordinarily quickly. Yes, Brian, you can.
Policy has nothing to do with evidence-based science. Technology is not amenable to the wishes of politicians. It does what the laws of physics say it will do. The environment has been massively improved by the wealth that we've created from the energy that we've used. Where's the 10 billion a year we're spending on renewables going? Who's got it?
Yes.
Small nuclear, just for the information of everybody here who probably don't know this, is about 0.5 gigawatt, which is as big as the original Magnox and AGR power stations. These are substantial power stations. These are not toys, but they are modular and they can be built in a factory. The reason this seems odd is because nobody's looking at it from the point of view of the coordination by the UN amongst the elites in all the different countries. It's not about nation states, it's about keeping control of nation states from the center. The tribal thing, it's easy tribal beliefs for the hard of thought, is what I've written here. That's what
that's fantastically helpful. Sophie, do you think that you can take that back to your uni and get all your green wokey beard people to, you know, do they have beards at your university yet?
No, it tends to be lots of green hair. I've never seen so much blue and green hair in my whole life.
Green and red.
But,
green and red.
I mean, people will start to wake up eventually when they start to see, you know, the cost of living crisis, the crisis in Ukraine. Hopefully they will wake up, because eventually, you know, Greta Thunberg isn't going to be a hero forever. And as
no, she's certainly not.
older,
you can be the new hero, Sophie.
Yeah, I should just be the you've got to do. You just got to paint like an anti-Greta Thunberg figure as like the next modern day Jesus, and then counterbalance it, and hopefully they'll start to see sense. I'm basically Britain's answer to Greta Thunberg. This is what we're going.
You are, and you need to take all this information back to your uni. And you were talking about starting some kind of group for young people who are interested in the anti-net zero stuff. Maybe it could be a subsidiary of what we're doing. Maybe we could talk about that.
Yeah, let's do it. I think it will be good.
Let's do it. Final word, Calvin. Calvin, final word. Come on, message of hope from you, the religious correspondent at GBC.
Okay, the message of hope is that, you know, we have a prime minister that is very pliable, and we know what his strengths and his weaknesses are. His primary weakness is his electability, in that he will do anything to stay in power. He's not a man of principle. So if we threaten him at the ballot box, he will crumble. So if we tell him, if enough people tell him that we do not want these net zero policies, he will have to change his mind, as we're seeing already. You know, as this war becomes a bigger issue and people start to forget about painting police cars rainbow colors and remember that we need men to be strong men and masculinity isn't toxic, and all these good old-fashioned ideas become normal again, people will say, why am I being pushed with these woke ideas? Why are these woke policies being pushed down my throat? And why am I paying out of my nose for something that I do not believe to be true?
No, I completely agree with you, and thank you so much. I'm just going to show you some fantastic stuff, actually. So if you love what we're doing, which I'm sure everyone does, and you want to take part, go onto our website and you can buy a CO2 as part of your membership pack. And who doesn't want a CO2? Because we need more CO2. Wonderful T-shirts that I've modelled. There you go. There you go. And sweatshirts as well. I'll just show you. Hang on, here we go. See, who wouldn't want one of those? Brilliant. Okay, so before we leave you, please can I urge you to sign our petition to stop the ban on fracking. Yes, it's true that the natural shale gas wells will not be concreted up next week, but that doesn't mean the government will go hell for leather on fracking as we need them to do. So let's show them that this is something we want to do. I have no doubt the climate change nutters, many funded by Russia, will not lie low. So we can never rest on our laurels. May peace and cheap energy be with you. And a big thank you to all of my guests. Till next time, Lois Perry. Bye-bye.
Live long and prosper.
Fine.